Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and I'm here for my NACL week number 5 overview and analysis video of the spring split. We are over halfway done with the NACL regular season here in spring already. It feels like we still have so much to learn about these teams and about these players, but we're really starting to get a good idea. I've been talking on and on and on, basically the entirety of this split, about how the middle of the pack seems so difficult to differentiate. Every team looks good in some aspect. Every team has its own problems, but we definitely learned a bit more this week with the 6 series over 2 days that we got. So I'm excited to go over it, but of course, let me know down in the comment section below what you guys thought of week number 5. What teams are impressing you, what teams are not impressing you, what players are impressing you, and what players maybe aren't living up to your expectations so far in 2024. I'd be really excited to hear what you guys think down below. If you want to know my thoughts on everything that's been happening in the NACL so far in 2024, of course, you can check out the playlist up in the iCard right now. But without further ado, let's jump right into the actual video, the analysis. Of course, if you are new here, what we're going to do is go series by series, talking about the advantages and the disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the series and a dud of the series for each individual series, and then at the end of the video, I'll be giving a player of the week and a dud of the week to kind of tie everything into a nice neat little bow. Of course, we'll also be updating my personal power rankings from number 1 to number 10 after 5 weeks of action, and let me tell you, there's definitely going to be some changes this week. I've been pretty hesitant to make changes and to drop certain teams, but it's really getting hard to deny certain outcomes much longer. We're over halfway through. If teams haven't figured it out yet, they're probably not going to be able to figure it out, and so without further ado, let's jump right into it. Of course, we got 2 days to cover, 3 series on each day, and that means we get to kick it off with day number 1. And day number 1 was really fun, and specifically our first series here was one I was really excited to see. It was Lit Esports taking on AOE Esports, and AOE was actually able to pick up the 2-0 series win here, and I'm not saying that's a huge shock. AOE actually looked really good throughout the beginning couple weeks, week 1, week 2 in particular. I really liked what AOE was looking like, but the past couple weeks, they've just kind of not been nearly as consistent, all kind of culminating in that big week 4 where they just did not look good really at all. Their top side was not consistent in any aspect, and you were just hoping that you could get a little bit more out of them, and more is what you got in this series. Lit has been actually pretty good, about a 500 team across the beginning part of this split, but they're more kind of dependent, I would say, right now on whether or not their opponents play well or don't play well. They're good enough to beat anybody who makes pretty clear errors, and they're not really going to beat a team that's on the money like AOE was in this series, and specifically like this bot lane was in this series. Pretty easy player of the series here. It's going to go to Wixie. I mean, he just dominated the Smolder, the Zeri. Both of them looked amazing. Rockboom tried to go for some more, I guess, interesting counters. The Tristana makes a lot of sense, especially pairing it up with something like Seraphine mid. I really like that idea, but Vayne in game number 2, you're really going for that, you know, late game matching. I guess you really want to be able to try and win those skirmishes harder than Zeri can, and it just was never really going to work out. You had a Nautilus, Breezy was on Braum, and that's always going to be a bit of a problem. Wukong, Orianna, Udyr, so many things that can make Vayne's life a lot more difficult, and I think the Zeri ended up being really impactful, and Wixie, for his credit, was amazing. He got a lot of stuff set up for him. I don't want to take anything away from the rest of this team. Breezy was really good in this series. Rosethorn played really well in this series, which you're really happy to see, but he was definitely the resource carry. He was the one they were putting a lot of attention and resources into to help them win the game, and Wixie kind of has been that so far. I praised Onat in week number 2 for being really the centralizing point for what AOE wanted to do, but it was really nice to see them play through bot lane. And Wixie and Breezy are kind of showing a lot of that chemistry that we were hoping to see at the beginning of the year when we talked about these two reuniting after so many years. I think it's interesting that Wixie has very much preferred and favored to go to these more hyper carries, these more late game style, you know, the Smolder, the Zeri, things like that. It obviously plays into his playstyle, or at least it did in this series. He's really good at Smolder. It's really interesting to watch, but, you know, it's going to be interesting to see if other teams tend to challenge that moving forward. There are early game AD carries that I would imagine that maybe you don't get banned out every single game, like Callista, you know, things like that I think could be a bit more of a problem. Maybe you even flex some mages into the bot lane to try and get that team fight presence going. It'll be interesting to see how teams respond to that, but at least in this series it worked for them. Zamudo also played really well. I really want to point him out in particular because I don't really think I've talked about Zamudo a ton over the beginning part of this split. Obviously, I was kind of both in and out on him last year. The mechanical skill is very apparent, but the consistency was just never really there. I think he's kind of been the same this year. There have been good games, there have been bad games. He tends to just kind of go with the flow of the game. It's not often that he is like dominating the top side and the rest of the team is losing. It's more so just, you know, he'll win pretty casually, and then if his team's not winning, they'll lose lose the game. Not like what Surdy was for like Team Liquid First last year or anything like that, but he's a good player, and I think this series kind of showed that. His mechanical skill is absolutely there. Dragoon, it's kind of been a skill check for top laners so far this split. And it's good to see Zamudo pass that pretty heavily. And then, like I said, Rosethorn had probably his best split, or his best series of the split. Up until this point, I was very critical of him last week. I've been very critical of him on this channel. I just really haven't seen that spark that was there 2 years ago in the last, year or so. Really nice to see him have this series and just kind of generate a lot of momentum and pressure on champions that really should be able to do that. Game number 1 was the most impressive for me on the Sedge, but Wukong was still really good. It's just the champion was in a really good spot in that game. I think Onat looks solid, certainly not somebody that's making a ton of mistakes, and we saw what he could do with resources. Generally, I think AOE was just really good in this series, in both of these games. And then for Lit, you would have hoped they would have been able to come out in this series and win it. They looked really good at the end of week number 4, and AOE looked like they were on the downswing, starting to struggle, but alas, it just wasn't meant to be. There were a couple of good moments, a couple of bad moments. Want to shout out the solo laners here, Dragoon and Messages. Dragoon didn't have a great series. He certainly was a little bit more aggressive than maybe I would have been, but, for the most part, you can still see why he's able to generate so many leads, especially against top laners that are going to be a bit more passive, because he's going to try and beat you, and sometimes that works, sometimes that doesn't, but he still was able to generate a lot of gold in this series. He led the team in kills over the course of this series. And then Messages is the other player I want to shout out. The Seraphine almost really made things interesting in game number 1. It just couldn't end up getting over the hump, and then, like I said, really weird draft in game number 2. You're really the range on Azir, and that's always going to be a bit more difficult, especially when you want to go for those bigger Shuriman and Shuffle engages. You're kind of taking away that range advantage that you would typically have. But dud of the series for me is going to go to Rockboom in the AD carry role. That Vayne game in game 2 was really brutal. Not that the Tristana game in game 1 was much better, but the Vayne game was pretty brutal to watch. Rockboom just got outplayed by Wixie. Wixie and Breezy were the better bot lane by a lot in this series, and that was very clear. Plux was also not particularly great, although I don't entirely blame him. Kisno had a really rough game number 2, actually kind of survived a bit in game number 1. Xin Shao's always going to have at least a little bit of pressure into a Sejuani. You're always going to be able to have some early momentum there, but the Maokai game was just not it. He lost momentum very quickly, lost pressure very quickly, and the team kind of collapsed after that. But the bot lane getting run over was definitely the biggest problem, and I think generally for Lit in this series, you were just kind of hoping to see a little bit more fight. I'm not going to say that they looked outclassed here, because we've seen them do better than this in other series, but this was certainly not the best that they have played. This is one of their weaker mechanical series, in my opinion. You have to hope it's a bit of an outlier, but losing against AOE is probably not what they wanted at the beginning of this week, but it is a really nice win for AOE. Obviously their momentum wasn't in the best of spots after week number 4, but they've only played 4 series even after this. They're so far behind in terms of schedule, basically everybody else in the NACL. They have so much left to prove, and if the bot lane can step up and play like this again, there is going to be a lot of potential for this team to rise a lot in the standings. And then moving on to our second series of day number 1 here, and this one I was really excited to see, so much so that I talked about it in last week's video. It was Disguised taking on Cincinnati Fear, and Fear are going to pick up a massive 2-1 win. They're going to move to 3-1 to start the split. I said it last week, Fear stayed at number 6, or moved up, I guess, to number 6 in my power rankings, but to get into that top 4, to really secure themselves that spot, they needed to win this week. They needed to be able to beat teams like DSG and TLC that were above them. Well, step 1 complete, because here is a really strong 2-1 win against a team that just has not been able to live up to the talent level that is on the roster at the current moment. Things are going wrong for DSG, and it is honestly kind of upsetting to watch, but for Fear, it's the opposite. This team is playing really hard and really, really well right now. The coaching staff and the staff in general on Fear have shown to be some of the best in the entire NACL. I think that has been proven. It was proven last year, it's proven this year. They get the most out of their players more consistently than almost any other staff. I mean, maybe you could say FlyQuest, but even then, they're an LCS team. That's completely different. Fear is, an amateur organization that is continuously able to bring in talent that people wouldn't necessarily consider upper echelon and win consistently with it. I'm not saying that these players are bad. In fact, I think a lot of growth has happened for a lot of these players over the course of this split, but, when it's so common for this organization to continuously get better, you have to start looking at the foundation, the root of it, and that's the coaching staff. So I really want to shout them out first and foremost, but let's talk about the players that are here. Player of the series for me is going to go to Toasty. It was really hard to pick anybody else here. Dapshin came very close. I really liked how he played, especially on the Tom Kench in game number 1, but the Yone game, the Orianna game, it just shows a a huge level of versatility, I think is how I want to put it. And obviously, versatility is something that this team has shown a lot of. Look at this draft in game number 3. It's very interesting. You draft out Rengar in the jungle for Chad, somebody who obviously plays it, but you're really going to rely a lot on these more aggressive plays. You want to fight pretty consistently with this team. You still have the Ori and the Xayah if you want to scale, but there are a lot of ways to press the issue with Rengar, with Cassante, with Rakan, and even, Orianna can do that to an extent if she really wants to play aggro. There are a lot of ways to keep the momentum going, and Toasty was awesome. It's the Orianna game in game 3 that really impressed me, and honestly, all Toasty has done so far this split is impress me. I've been so impressed and so surprised at how good he has been so quickly. I think so many people knew that the talent was there, that obviously the mechanics were there. We had seen it with some Assassin gameplay, and, a lot of people who knew Tier 3 a little bit better than me were hyping Alex up a lot, but Toasty has been phenomenal. I mean, truly great for this Fear team. He has been one of the more consistent mid laners in the entirety of the NACL. He does get a lot of resources, which is something to account for. It's not like he's playing low resource mid style. He is definitely playing alongside his team, but it's very much working. He is a central focus for what this team wants to do, and he is capitalizing on it well. He was awesome here. Like I said, I think you could give this to Daption. Fear supports often perform really well. I don't want to say overperform, but, Trevor, JJ, now Daption, all of them kind of following in this suit of just being really, really good for the team as a whole and being really good at controlling the map. The Tahm Kench, like I said, in game 1 was great. The Rakan in game 3 was really good. And honestly, I really like how Daption plays Enchanters. I know things didn't work out in game number 2, but I just like the way he's played Milio up until this point, this split. I just think generally this bot lane's very good. Lens was very good specifically on the Senna. Still very good on the Xayah. We can throw game 2 out for Fear in general, but Philip dominating in game 1 on the Gwen, really being able to pop off at the back half of that game, just really good stuff. And then Chad, Maokai, Sejuani, Rengar, switching up the styles a little bit here. And it very much worked for this team. They were able to play off of each other well, and I think the aggressiveness suits this Fear team very, very well. This is a big win. DSG, I know they haven't been super successful, 2-7, 1-3 going into this series, but this is still a very talented team with a couple of former Fear players that were probably raring to go for this series to be able to win it is very impressive, and I think it's definitely something to be commended. But for DSG, this isn't the worst loss that you've suffered all year. It's certainly one that does raise concerns, though. I mean, game 1 and game 3 were not ideal. Game 3 in particular was really the game that I felt you got the most outclassed in. Game 2 was really good, and game 1 was close. There were moments in game 1 where it felt like it was winnable for DSG if a couple other things go their way, but game 3 was just not great, and generally I think the other side of the coin kind of flipped for them, where the aggressiveness was a little bit too much. It felt like they weren't connected enough in terms of when they wanted to play their aggressive style, and they were going for a lot of 50-50 plays that I just didn't think they had to do here. Dead of the series for me is going to go to Perry in the jungle. I love Perry. I mean, anybody who watched the channel last year and even in the primer this year knows that. I had him as my #1 jungler in the NACL going into this year, mostly because I didn't think Yuji was playing, but also because he had earned it from what he had showed last year. But I don't know, something about this team, it's just not the same level of synergy. I think going from Shochi to Young, it's a very different play style. Young is not nearly as aggressive, or at least not outwardly as aggressive in terms of the lane prio he's able to generate, which means some of those aggressive plays that Perry liked to go for in the early game aren't working out nearly as much. I do like how he played the Trundle, but it's honestly been the more aggressive picks that feel like he is, I don't want to say trying too hard, but I don't know what's in his head. It looks on, tape like he's tilted. Like, that's really the only way I can describe, the gameplay that has come in from Perry is he's trying to force a lot of plays that I just don't think need to be forced. I think oftentimes you're in a situation here where you've got, especially in game 3, you've got Nazir. I know you've got the Kalista, but you've got an Udyr. You've got ways to stay relevant in the back half of this game. Wukong's going to be relevant, and it just felt like he was pushing plays. Same thing with the Nocturne, consistently going in and at best trading 1-for-1 in a lot of those fights, which is generally why I think that champion isn't one of my favorites in Pro, as I've said multiple times on this channel. But it's not just him. I mean, the bot lane is not generating any sort of prio, even when they're playing early game bot lanes like Kalista, Renata. It's just not working for them at the current moment. Manui, Poom, they don't seem to have great isolated chemistry. I think obviously both of them are very talented, and both of them have shown that they can be top level players at this level, but it's just not working for them. I think Young is really a positive for this team. I don't think he was a positive the entirety of this series, but he wasn't really the one making a lot of mistakes, but he's also a lot more passive than his jungle, and I do think that's throwing both of them off. And I think for Tenacity in the top lane, he's doing well to try and isolate some of these matchups, but he hasn't been nearly as useful as you would hope from a guy who who dominated the NACL, who, wasn't perfect at the LCS level, but was getting better game after game. For him to come back here and really make the choice to go back to pro, go back to the NACL, it's not like he's been a top 2, top 3 top laner in the NACL. He's just kind of been a guy for this team, and it's just a little bit disappointing. 1-4 is certainly not the start DSG wanted. They're going to have to get things together. I mean, you're 5 series into a split where you really don't have a lot of room for error. It's single round robin. I mean, you've only got, 4 more series left? Like, you got to figure it out pretty quickly. I think they can. Obviously, they're talented enough, and as long as they make top 8, they're going to be in that playoff race. But right now, I don't even know if they're going to be in that zone. They're not in terms of standings, and so they've got to figure something out. And then for Fear, obviously, this team did everything I could have asked from them. They won the series, and they won it pretty cleanly. Their players are looking good, and generally, I just think I underrated them once again. It is clear that this organization's motto is to overperform, and that was really, really apparent in this series. They've looked awesome so far in 2024. And then moving on to our third series of day number 1, and it's a battle of the red teams that I was excited to see. Wildcard Gaming taking on Maryville University, and as per usual, at least this season, Maryville picking up another win. They're 5-0, 10-2 at the start of the NACL split here. That makes them in first place, at least for now, after day number 1. Of course, they've been tied with FlyQuest all season long in terms of what they've been able to offer here at this level as the 2 top teams, the 2 undefeated teams, and that continues here for Maryville. Everybody stepping up their game, everybody proving they, deserve to be on one of the better teams. I think maybe if you would have told, people that Maryville would have been starting Niles, UG, Spirax in that order, and, they would have been one of the best teams in the league, I think a lot of people would say that the jungle mid was probably overperforming and really dominating a lot of games, but you gotta give a lot of credit to this bot lane, who has really realized the potential that I think we all knew they had going into the year. Like, it wasn't just this year, it was last year. We were hyping them up. I was really excited for what Jerry and Zyko could do once they got very comfortable here in Tier 2, and they are taking over. I mean, they're truly the best bot lane in the NACL right now. I don't even think that's all that disputable. They've been the best bot lane, at least at the start of the split. It's been really fun. For Wildcard, obviously, this is a pretty big losing spell. You were 2-0 to start the year. You're 2-4 now. That's a 4-series losing streak, and basically all your momentum has fallen off. The really good bot lane you had at the beginning of the split has just kind of turned into a meh bot lane that has been inconsistently good, and you're certainly not getting great performances out of your more feast or famine players, and so we'll talk about them obviously as we get there. But for Maryville, it's just really hard not to look at the bot lane first. Scary Jerry is going to get yet another player of the series for me. 21-0-14, and that doesn't even tell the full story. He was so active on the map. He was so willing to look for ways to be able to spiral the game out of control in favor of Maryville that it's really top-level stuff. Like, this isn't just, UG is having really good games in the jungle, generating a lot of prio, and Zyko's playing really well, or Spirax is really moving around and allows Jerry to take over in the late game. It's Jerry actively being very aggro, stepping up and making plays with the rest of the team, and that's what you want to see out of an AD carry prospect. We've gone from, not to say Jerry and Zyko were bad, I had them both at around number 7 in terms of my my position rankings at the beginning of the split, but they have skyrocketed up to, like, number 1 and number 2, like, at worst, in their positions in terms of how they played at the beginning of this split. I'm very excited to see what they continue to do. LCS prospects must be, getting looks. Like, you must be getting LCS looks if you're Jerry and Zyko at this point. But it's not like the rest of this team is playing bad. UG continues to look amazing. It was the right decision for them to start him over Iconic. I like Iconic. I think he's a pretty decent player, but UG is a complete difference maker at this level. He is the number 1 jungler in the NACL, in my opinion, and he continuously proves it. It doesn't really matter what he plays. He can play tanky engagers, but love him on the Lee Sin, love him on the Graves, something that can be more aggressive. Of course, he plays it really well. Spirax continues to be awesome. One of the best mid laners in the NACL, and Niles is very solid on the top side. Honestly, he's been better this year than he was last year in terms of his isolated laning stats. He doesn't really get a lot of resources, but he is winning 1v1 very, very consistently for this team, and so generally, Maryville just clicking on every single cylinder you could possibly ask for. A great start to the year. 5-0 does sum up how good they have been. And then for Wildcard, like I said, kind of a downswing right now. You've gone 0-4 in your last 4 series. It's about as bad as it could possibly get right now. And a lot of that has just been, I guess, maybe regression towards the mean. They were overperforming a ton. I think a lot of people, me included, saw this as not a very good team going into the year. I think I had them 9th in my preseason power rankings. I know a bunch of people had them 10th. And so, not a lot of people really were seeing that 2-0 start coming, but it has kind of fallen back down to earth. Done of the series for me is going to go to Winnie. Very similar to what I talked about with Perry. Sometimes you can be a little bit over aggressive, and I'm gonna be honest, that's just what we're seeing out of Nocturne at this it's not even just at this level, it's at every level. Nocturne is not working in pro on this patch. It's just not doing well. It wasn't doing well in the LCS. It wasn't doing well a patch ago in the LEC or in the LCK or in the LPL. Nocturne just doesn't feel like a particularly good pick, and when he looked bad on it in game 1, but he looked way worse in game number 2. If it was just game number 1, Aaron probably would have gotten done of the series because that Varus game was brutal. Having to play with Nasus support, I can't imagine made things a ton easier. I know that that's obviously a tech. I know that the Wither is strong, but it's not very good. Like, I get it. It's a counter to Kalista, but it doesn't really do anything else, and Jerry got so fed in that game that it ended up not mattering at all, but Aaron really had a hard time playing, and then he was much better in game 2 on the Smolder, but then it was the top side's turn to not play super well. Winnie's not playing well. Quacker, I think, has taken some major steps back in recent weeks. I was all in on Quacker as like the next Surdy, in my opinion, in terms of how he was playing on a team that didn't really feel all that strong. He was very good last year on Supernova, very strong start to the year this year on Wildcard, but things have just not worked out in the last couple of weeks. He was my dud of the week last week, certainly not better in this series. Niles is a good laner and a good player, so I'm not freaking out too much that he lost, but it certainly is concerning, and Darkwings is kind of just there. He really hasn't been good either. He's definitely been more of a secondary figure, and, you know, this is a player that we're used to being more feast or famine, taking control of games on his own, you know, having great games and having bad games. This split, he's just kind of been there, and I think that's more of a regression than anything else, and so I'm a little frustrated by Wildcard. This team has gone from one that I was excited to watch regularly, a top 6-ish team in the NACL, to what could potentially be a bottom 2 team at the current moment with everybody playing a little bit better. I just don't feel good about this Wildcard team at all, and I think a lot of it is just everybody kind of returning to Earth. And then for Maryville, it's the opposite. They're not returning to Earth. This is a top 2 team in the NACL. Them and FlyQuest are really fighting for first, and, you know, Supernova's there, like, in 3rd place, and you know, they're doing strong. I think they're a very good team, but Maryville has earned their spot in the upper echelons of the NACL. Everybody's playing well, including the players that maybe weren't as highly touted going into the year, maybe haven't had as much success at the NACL level, and that is the most important thing. For this bot lane to look as amazing as it has, that really fills me with the confidence that this really is sustainable. And then moving on to our day number 2 here in week number 5. I'm excited to get into the second half of this week. Again, a lot of fun games here in the NACL, and that was no different in this series between Lit Esports and FlyQuest Challengers. Yes, a bit of a top versus bottom clash, and it did go as expected with FlyQuest being able to pretty cleanly pick up a 2-0 win, but still, it's nice to see teams that are supposed to perform well. That hasn't always been, you know, the given case here in the NACL this split, and so for FlyQuest to continue their streak to go to 5-0 to match Maryville after that day number 1, it's really, really big for them. They are now sitting in a great spot, obviously being undefeated for Lit. You know, tough week, losing to AOE, losing to FlyQuest. One of those series I think was a little bit more expected in terms of the outcome than the other, but I still don't think it's anything to worry about. I still think this team, you know, is showing some good things. I don't think they got obliterated in this series in the way that maybe, you know, a worse team would against, you know, the team that FlyQuest is. I certainly don't think it was close, but I do think that there were some redeeming qualities, and we'll get into that. But let's talk about what FlyQuest is doing right. And honestly, right now, it's a bit of everything. Honestly, the only players that I really haven't talked about as like stars yet are Sajed and kind of Quad to an extent. Quad's been good, and Sajed's obviously been good as well, but neither of them have really stood out as like superstars for me. It's really been Surdy and Shade and the 2 EG boys coming over that I think have really pushed this team forward, have been kind of the focal point for what they wanted to play through, and that's worked for FlyQuest. But in this series, it really was the bot lane that was kind of exploding. Now, Surdy was obviously great in game number 2 on the Cassante. That champion is very strong, has a lot of tools, but credit to Sajed and Chime for how good they were in game number 1. I'm going to give player of the series to Chime. I thought he was the most consistent player over the course of both games. His ability to stay active on the map, it's something that I've always really liked about him. He is not a passive player. He's somebody who is going to go out there and try to make plays. He's going to try to keep the game interesting. It's what I like so much on TSM for such a long time. It's why I was really like touting for Chime. I was like, please keep him in the LCS in 2022, you know, when he was kind of a mid-season call-up for TSM, and then obviously in 2023 when that team overperformed as well. I thought Chime was still good last year. You know, I was very surprised to see him in the NACL, and he has predictably been very good. He had the highest grade of any player in the offseason for me in the NACL. He was the only A-graded player, you know, A+-ish graded player in terms of current ability in the NACL, and, you know, I'm not going to say that that's kind of what has been lived up to. I think Surdy is definitely in that conversation as well, his teammate, but Chime has earned that distinction. He has been that good this split, but Sajed finally with kind of a big breakout series. I don't think he's been bad. I think he's actually filled his job very well. He just hasn't had to do a whole ton on FlyQuest because topside is so important and has won super hard. And so Sajid's kind of taken more of a backseat role, especially in this meta, where it's not exactly uncommon for you to put your bot lane on a weak side. But I thought he was really good in this series. The Varus in game number 1 in particular was really solid. Obviously, you're not going to stand out nearly as much on Jhin as you are on Varus, but generally I thought this was one of his more impressive series in terms of highlight plays, which is really good to see. And then Surdy continues to look awesome. I mean, like I said, the Cassante in game 2 was really good. Shaden and Quad are always winning. Shaden's actually very quietly having a phenomenal split. I don't know if it's quietly, but there are a lot of pieces on this team that get a lot of recognition. I don't know if Shaden is getting as much as maybe some of the others, but he has been the best jungler in the NACL, in my opinion, at the start of this year. That includes UG. It's just really been amazing for FlyQuest. Everything is clicking for this team, and to me, it's pretty clear that they are the best team in the NACL. And then for Lit on the other side, you know, again, you're not going to freak out too much over a loss to FlyQuest. FlyQuest is a very good team, one that you're not worried about, you know, losing to in that kind of way, but maybe you would have liked to see them not go 0-2 in terms of series this week. It's definitely not an ideal situation. Dud of the series is going to go to Kisno. It's becoming very apparent that Kisno is a very aggressive player, and that means, you know, mechanically speaking, he's actually able to keep up with a lot of the middle-tier NACL junglers, but when he plays people like Shaden and teams that are just going to be able to out-macro him, he can fall apart a bit in the mid-game. It's kind of what we saw here. The Viego, the Xin Zhao, it really wants to try and snowball and accelerate, especially if you're going to pick TF and Karma and, you know, things like that. Jhin in game number 1. You really want to try to play around getting the resets and, you know, out-macroing, out-tempoing the enemy team, and it just was never going to happen for Lit in this series. It's okay, again, it's against FlyQuest, you're not freaking out, but this team went from 2-2 to 2-4, not exactly the week that I think they were looking for. I think Rockboom and Plux definitely took a step back from, you know, what they were last week. Plux in particular, I don't think looked great in this series. The Rakan in game number 2 definitely worried me a bit. I thought Rockboom was better than he was in the first series of the week, though, when he just kind of got outclassed by Wixie. I thought Sajid obviously was better than him, but, you know, at least he had some redeeming qualities. Messages has been fine. Dragoon has really started losing. Again, he kind of feels like the barometer going up against a player like Surdy. I'm not worried too much. You know, Surdy has beaten everybody at this level, and so I don't want to read too much into this loss for Lit, is I guess what I'm trying to say. They're sitting at 2-4, but I really don't feel all that different about this team than I did before this series, and the same thing can be said about FlyQuest in a good way, where this is the best team in the NACL. Losing to FlyQuest is not a bad thing, and FlyQuest should be winning basically every series that they run into. They are a real threat to go undefeated this split, but I think we're all waiting for that undefeated clash with Maryville just a couple of days down the line. And then moving on to our second series of day number 2, and just as I talked about with the second series of day number 1, I said last week how excited I was to see this series, even more so after day 1. It was Team Liquid Challengers taking on Cincinnati Fear, and Team Liquid is going to pick up a massive win for themselves here. They drop game number 1, a very close game number 1, I want to add. Game 2's kind of a blowout, very in favor of TL. You just got the Aurelion Soul super far ahead, and all of a sudden he just destroys the game. Jenkins was also really good. And then game 3 was also a bit of a banger. This was just a really fun series, and it does prove that both of these teams are pretty clearly top 5, in my opinion. Now, for Team Liquid, it's just kind of been a wait-and-see approach. It's like, I know you're not doing well at the current moment. You're 1-4, you're 3-8, but you've played all the good teams. That is something that is worth noting. And also, you just have to imagine that this team is going to be better than what they have put on the Rift at the beginning of this split, because truly, they were bad at the beginning of this split, and it was really, really hard to watch. But this was a good sign that it's still there, and we finally got some of the individual performances that I think we were waiting on, specifically in the mid lane. Player of the series is pretty obviously going to go to Roamer, who was awesome in this series, in all 3 games, even in their game 1 loss. He was the one very much keeping them in it on the Orianna. He played really well. Toasty struggled to play into him in this series. This is really the first time that we've seen him kind of not, I don't want to say tested, but like really kind of like pushed to his limit. And, you know, this was a rough series for him, and we'll get to that. But, you know, for Roamer, this is what we've been waiting for. I had him as my number 1 mid laner in the NACL going into the year. If he was on Team Liquid, he would have been a top 5 mid laner in the LCS at the beginning of the split in terms of my rankings, right? Like, he was a really interesting prospect coming in from the Hanwha Life system, and I really liked him in Challengers League. It just hadn't worked out at the beginning of the time here in the NACL, but as we've seen with some, you know, Korean imports, sometimes it takes time to get used to the environment, to get used to playing with your teammates, to get a communication structure built. And generally, I think obviously it did take time for Romer. I'm not going to say that he's going to be perfect from here on out, but this is comfort. This is Aurelion Sol. This is Akali in game number 3. These are the things that Romer is going to be a lot better on. You know, you've got your late game, you know, scaling. You've got your proactivity. I mean, Lee Sin plus Akali is so much proactivity into something like Graves that it's very difficult to end up playing. Romer just outplayed and outskilled a lot of people, and this is kind of what we were expecting from him. This is the Romer that we were promised. It's nice to finally see it. Big shout out to Jenkins. He also was very good in this series. I think he has played better in the recent weeks. I was kind of critical on him, you know, not only going into the split because I didn't love how he ended his last tenure on CLG in the NACL. I thought he could have been a bit better in 2023 at the, you know, in the spring split, but, you know, also he wasn't great at the beginning of spring this year in 2024. He really wasn't killing it. Not to say he was the reason for TL's losses. It was a team effort for sure, but, you know, it's not like he was dominating in the top lane. I think he has certainly been better over the last couple of weeks, and that's nice to see. I think he's, honestly, it's weird to say he's going away from some of his comfort picks like the Rumble, like the Kennen, and getting on more bruisers, things like Cassante, and I really do think it's working out for him. I think that generally those are just so much stronger in the current patch, on the live patch, and I think they're figuring that out pretty clearly. Spawn and Kim Down were very good here. This was one of their better series in a while. They've really not been great. They've not clicked. Kim Down in particular, I think, has taken a step back, and Keel, I think, has taken a step back, but Romer and Jenkins really being able to dominate fights, and Spawn being a really good secondary carry in a lot of these games. That's the formula for Team Liquid. That's what you built this team off of, so it's really nice to see. And then for Fear on the other side, you know, it's not the worst loss in the world. You were able to win a game against Team Liquid, and honestly, Game 3 was very close. You had a lot of big positives in this series. I think Game number 1 was really fun to watch, specifically from your bot lane in the Varus Heimerdinger lane. Not always the most consistent lane of all time, but I think it worked here. It was just games 2 and 3 that I was a little bit less than enthused about. Dud of the series, like I said, is going to go to Toasty. I don't think it was entirely his fault that they lost this series or anything like that, but Romer getting super far ahead and just being able to dominate, winning every lane, I do think that was a factor in it, and it's going to happen. Like we said with Toasty, he was ahead of schedule. He still is ahead of schedule. Everybody was kind of expecting him to take some time to get used to playing in Tier 2. It was a pretty big jump for him. Was always a player with playstyle questions, and so, you know, for him to have been so good in their first couple of series, that was very ahead of schedule. Romer is not somebody that you can feel awful losing to. He's just a really good player, and, you know, Toasty got a bit outskilled in this series. It's going to happen. Chad was also a bit slow, I would say, in this series. I think the Graves is obviously something that we've seen a lot from North American junglers. We love it here in NA, but I don't know if that's necessarily what I want to play into Lee Sin Akali. Like, I get it. I understand the idea behind it, but we saw the weaknesses of it too, where they were just able to kind of do whatever they wanted, and even though this game did go long, Team Liquid had full control of the map for a lot of it because of the tempo they were able to generate, and that's always going to be the risk. I thought Chad was worse in game 2 for what it's worth. Obviously, everybody was in game number 2, but I thought Lens and Daption were fine. Maybe Daption could have been a little bit safer in the back half of this series, but I think on an engager, you're going to die a little bit more often. Lens was pretty decent, and Philip didn't get absolutely obliterated or anything. I just think jungle mid was a little out of control, right? And that's going to happen sometimes, right? You can't expect to dominate every series like this. Fear's only 2 losses on the split so far are to the 2 LCS Challengers teams, FlyQuest and Team Liquid, so you're not worried about it too much. Again, this team already is so ahead of schedule, and I think, honestly, more than anything, they proved that they are a top 5 team in this series here, that they should be considered in the same realm as teams like Team Liquid. I think we just want to see a tad bit more consistency from them. They were just a couple of plays away from being able to win this series, and I think that could have been really big for them. But for Team Liquid, this was really nice, a really good win. Hopefully this gets this team on track. We've all just been waiting for this team to figure it out. I haven't dropped them from number 5 in my power rankings because I just had to assume that things were going to get better for them. This seems like it's the right trajectory, although we said that a couple of weeks ago as well, and then they went right back into their negative stances. Fear is not a bad team at all. Being able to beat them in a series like this, it should inspire confidence in these players, and especially in the way that they did it, with a couple of their players just being really high mechanical outputs. I think that's a really big positive. Hopefully this is the shot in the arm that Team Liquid is needed. And that's going to bring us to our final series of the week here, our 6th series, our 3rd of day number 2, and it was a fun one. Supernova taking on AOE Esports, and Supernova's going to pick up a 2-1 series win. They're going to move to 4-1 at the start of the split. It's not the 5-0 that Maryville and FlyQuest have, but it is very clear to me, at least, that there is a top 3 in the NACL, as I've been saying, and Supernova has clearly shown that they are a part of that top 3. They are title contenders for real. This team continues to play very well tell they have a very clear play style. They know exactly who they want to let kind of take a lot of the shine, take a lot of the more carry role, and they know how to facilitate those players. A lot of players have done a really good job of taking a back seat in certain circumstances to kind of let others shine in a really big way. So I really like the synergy, I guess, of this team, the continuity that they're able to put out game after game. It's really, really good, and I think it's a clear style for how they can play. And then for AOE, not the worst loss. Again, honestly, you played kind of well this week and in this series. I think there was a lot to like here, especially because of your win earlier this week. I know this drops you back below 500, but you're still above 500 in terms of game score. You're at 7-6 because of that win in game number 2, and so you're not freaking out too much. And generally, I think this team looked a lot better in week number 5 than they have really at any point throughout this split, maybe outside of week number 2, where they also looked good. But for Supernova, let's talk about it. Player of the series is once again going to go to Kenvi for me. I'm just in love with how he is playing the game at the current moment. It feels like he has gotten back to his comfort zone. Gone are the days of just spamming Maokai and Sejuani like he was on Immortals for so many years. It felt like he was playing Sej every single game, and then when he would eventually get to play Viego, or even like a Vi, or even like obviously his Graves or his Kindred are obviously great, but anything that can be a little bit more proactive, anything that he can take a little bit more of the onus and more of the resources on. He did very well at the LCS level. Those were his best games, and so it's nice to see him get back down here to tier 2 and continue that growth pattern. I think he has done exactly what I expected him to do, and that's get a lot of his confidence back super early on. Now, I don't think it's all Kenvi. I certainly don't want to say it was all Kenvi. The Vi game in game number 2 was a little much for me, at least, but I think everything else was really solid. The Xin Zhao, the Viego, I thought very, very good games. I don't think he could do it alone, though. I think one of the big reasons why he struggled on Immortals was because he is the player that does kind of want resources, wants to be facilitated a bit more, and lucky for him, he's got a team that's very willing to do that. Shochi was amazing in this series, as he typically is, but he has really kind of taken a more supportive role on this team, and not to say that he's not carrying in terms of damage in a lot of these fights. He's still putting out a lot of damage, and he's still doing a lot, but you're not seeing him pick his lane-dominant, like Akshan or Yone that, he kind of was a lot over the course of last year. You're seeing Karma, you're seeing Twisted Fate, you're seeing Talia, you're seeing things that want to move around the map, that want to stay active. I think this is perfect for how this team wants to play the game, and this is what I was talking about earlier with the synergy. Shochi's a great player, one of the best mid laners at this level, but he doesn't need resources in order to be relevant. That's what makes him so dangerous. He wins so naturally isolated in these 1v1 matchups that even when you put him on something that's going to be a little bit more macro-focused or a little bit more supportive like the Karma, he's still such a major impact that Kenvi's job becomes infinitely easier. So these two play off of each other in an incredible way. I think Shochi has really elevated what Kenvi is able to do, and I think if you wanted to put him on carries, you could do that as well. I just think this is the style that Supernova likes. This is what I was talking about, like I said, earlier in, this little preamble, is that the synergy of the players on this team, I think, really works, and I think they've identified a strategy that works. Part of that has to do with this bot lane also being as stable as they are. Diamond's a bit of a playmaker. That was kind of his problem on Dignitas last year. He got scapegoated so much. A team that was so inactive and passive with Santorin and Jensen, and, Jensen in particular really had to evolve over the course of the split, but, you plug and play Diamond, a really aggressive support who's going to try to find engages on that team, and it just didn't end up working out. I think he was scapegoated because he was looking for a lot of these options, but you put him on a team that's going to follow up with some of the plays that he made a bit better. I think some of those plays are actually not all that bad. I said a lot of that last year. To see him come back down here to the NACL and continue to dominate, I'm not surprised. I don't think anybody should be surprised. He's a really, really good player. That Rakan game in game number 1 was phenomenal. He was the best player in game number 1, I should say. And then Array, deathless across this entire series, including game number 2, the loss in game number 2. It's just really good stuff. You're really happy to see that. Obviously, he is, again, very good for this team. They have a very good idea of what they want to do, and Array is very stable. He's not going to be the biggest, aggressive, dominating presence, but you've got Diamond and Kenvi and at times Shochi and Faisal for that. You can have Array just be this really stable bot laner who's very good mechanically and is a very good team fighter. He's not going to make mistakes. That's kind of what he's been for this team. It allows the jungle mid to be a little bit more active. It allows Faisal to really dominate the top side. It allows them to focus on the 0-8 Yone on the top of the map here. And overall, I think it's really good for Supernova. I mean, you can basically point out anybody on this team and say that they're all playing well at the current moment. It is really, really fun to watch. And, this is one of the better teams in the NACL, and I think they've proven that. And then for AOE, not the worst loss in the world. You went 1-1 this week, 3-2 in terms of game score. You're still above 500. Things could absolutely be worse. And generally, I'm way more positive about AOE after this series than I was before this series, it's just very weird to kind of talk about them because the NACL middle of the pack is so dense in terms of the teams that are in it. I still think the carry roles are playing very well. Onat and Wixie have been the standouts for AOE, in my opinion, across 2024 so far. Of course, we talked about Wixie in the earlier series this week, but I'm a big fan of Onat. He continues to rise up in my player rankings. He continues to look very, very good. And honestly, there's only so much that I need to see before I just like say that you're one of the better mid laners in the NACL. I'm not sure he's like top 3 or top 4 or anything like that, but he's certainly in the area. I really like Onat, and I'm really happy to see him continue to develop. Wixie and Breezy, like I said, have been very good. Wixie in particular, I think, has really stood out, but Breezy's always been a player that I've liked on this channel. Rosethorn had one of his better series, one of his better weeks in a while, including last year, I would say. Unfortunately, Zamudo is going to get dead of the series. That Yone game in Game 3 was brutal. I mean, very, very rough to watch. It's just one of those games where you're a very aggressive player. We know Zamudo. We know he's going to try and make plays. We know he's going to be a little bit more aggressive. And sometimes those plays work, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes you get caught out. Sometimes Faisal, Kenvi, Shochi, they all are there to try and take advantage of this Yone and continuously push him further down. And unfortunately, that's just what happened. You got to take the good with the bad with a player like Zamudo because he is going to be a bit more feast or famine. We have a lot of top laners in the NACL like that. That's why top is so fun to watch right now, is because so many of them are so mechanically talented, but it can be a bit difficult for them to be consistent from game to game. It's why they get a lot of dead of the series, because usually when they lose, they don't lose, gracefully, if you will, but, that's just kind of what you get with a player like Zamudo. We've seen the good. He was really good earlier this week, and so I'm not freaking out. Doesn't really change my opinion too much. This is very similar to kind of the series he would put out on Wildcard last year, but generally for AOE, it's just hard not to look at this team positively, especially with the carry duo playing super well, and I like Breezy a lot. If the top side of the map can, be good enough, like this could be a top 6 team. There really isn't a lot that's kind of stopping them from being there. Are they definitely better than teams like DSG or Wildcard or teams in that area? I don't know. It's going to be kind of hard to make that assertion, but this was a relatively good series from them. Being able to take a game off of Supernova is not easy, and that speaks highly of Supernova and just how good they are. They really are like top 1 potential. They're very stable. They have great synergy. They're fun to watch. They're everything that's great about the NACL. They're a bunch of developing young North American players. I'm really excited to see if they can continue to grow. Their only loss, obviously, this split so far has been to Maryville, undefeated. Maryville, which doesn't look like a bad loss at all at the current moment. I'm really excited to see what happens when this team finally goes up against a team like FlyQuest. I'm really intrigued to see how that matchup ends up working out, but I'm not counting Supernova out of being the best team in the NACL. I certainly think it's a possibility, and they just continue to look like that every series, in my opinion. All right, but that is going to do it for my NACL Week 5 overview and analysis video here in the spring split. Up on the screen now, you can see the updated standings after 5 weeks of action here in the NACL. Of course, any ties will just be broken alphabetically. We're still in the stage where we have ties, 1 for 1st and 1 for 7th place. Certainly kind of interesting, but we can go over what is on the screen now. Of course, on the right of all of these team cards, you'll see 3 things. First, the power ranking. That's where I personally power rank these teams from number 1 to number 10. Second is change. That's how they have changed from last week to this week. And then, of course, the streak that they're currently on. We can go over the risers and the fallers and just the power rankings in general. Top 3 are unchanged as they should be, but number 4 is new. It is Team Liquid and Cincinnati Fear moving up 1 spot each, and DSG moving down 2. That loss to Fear is just, this is where they are right now, at their absolute best. This is where they are. They're 1-4. They're in 9th place right now. We're getting close. We're in the back half of the split. You gotta be top 8. Like, that has to be a must for this team and for the expectations that they had going into the split. It's just not working out right now. They're moving down to 6. Team Liquid somehow at 2 and 4 is at number 4 in my power rankings, is moving up in my power rankings. It's pretty crazy to say that, but if they don't continue what they showed this week, then yeah, I'm gonna move them down again. This is purely based off of what they showed against Fear in their series this week, which was really good stuff against a really good team. And Fear, proportionally is gonna move up to number 5. If they had beaten Team Liquid, they would be number 4 in these power rankings, but alas, they're going to stay at number 5. Then at number 7, we've got AOE moving up all the way to number 7. Pretty good stuff from them. They had a very good week, I would say, all things considered. Wildcard moving down to 8, Lit moving down to 9. Neither really looking all that good in the recent weeks. I mean, Lit was looking really good in week 4, but not quite as good in week number 5. That loss to AOE was definitely one that hurt them in my power rankings, and then Mirage didn't play. They're going to stay at number 10 for the time being. But let me know if you agree or disagree with my power rankings down in the comment section below. What do you agree with? What do you disagree with? Who am I too high on? Who am I too low on? Would love to know your thoughts and opinions on everything down there below. But it's time to move into my player of the the week, and my dud of the week for week number 5, player of the week, is going to go to Scary Jerry, the 80 carry for Maryville University. Maryville is just clicking on all cylinders. We have 2 back-to-back Maryville player of the weeks. It was Spyrax last week, Scary Jerry this week. They're both playing at a very high level, but Jerry has really been unlocked for this team. He has been a hyper carry, someone they can put a ton of resources into that's going to output a ridiculous amount for them. Really good stuff from him. Maryville in general is playing great, but Jerry is a big reason for that. Runners up, my honorable mentions, Romer, the mid laner for Team Liquid Challengers. Really, really good series. This was the best series he's played in the NACL by far against Fear here. And that's all you can want, is progression, is him getting better series after series. It's okay that he didn't adapt or, be perfect basically from day one, but to see that growth is really encouraging, and it's a big reason why I think Team Liquid is getting better. And then Wixie, he's going to be my other honorable mention here. AOE was generally fine this week, and Wixie was definitely the best player on that team. I was really impressed with how he was able to operate. Maybe he could have been a bit more aggressive in their second series, but I actually think he played really well. So, Scary Jerry player of the week, Romer and Wixie as the honorable mentions, and then my dud of the week, unfortunately, is going to go to Kisno, the jungler for Lit. Rough week for Lit in general. 0-2 is never a great place to be, but, a couple of tough series. I think Kisno is just starting to show some of the inexperience. Again, this guy's only been playing pro for about a year, even at like an amateur level, and so, he really doesn't have a lot of experience, and I think some of that is kind of coming through now. He is somebody who has looked good when he has tempo, when he's able to play from ahead, but when he has to react and adapt to a couple of situations, especially against some of the better and more aggressive junglers in the league, like Shaden this week, it just doesn't go quite as well for him, and I think we saw that. I don't think he's been playing bad. I just think, Lit was a little bit disappointing this week in Kisno. I think was somebody that, maybe didn't have the best week possible, but I think he can bounce back. He was really good at the beginning of the split for this team, but that's gonna do it. I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, let me know down in the comment section below, and of course, hit that like button. It really does mean a lot. Lets me know you guys are enjoying the content. It does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here as well, hit the subscribe button. We post about all 4 of the major regions as well as the NACL every single week that they play here on this channel. That's LCS, LEC, LCK, and LPL, and again, as well as the NACL, all 5 of those regions whenever they play weekly. So if you want a comprehensive overview of everything going on in LoL Esports, this is the place for it. Hit that subscribe button and hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos do go live. But of course, with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.